Australian rental crisis only to get worse. GDP dies and the RBA is struggling for a solution. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, Branko is on board with his take on the cost of living crisis, specifically in terms of the rental markets. How are you going today, Branko?
Good. Thanks for having me back on.
So you wrote the piece today. It was full of lots of really valuable analysis. I found it really interesting. It highlighted some of the very significant issues that we're facing at the moment with rental prices. And it's something that Alex has touched on when she's sort of been looking at this idea of cost of living crisis, but you really went in quite a bit of depth on the rental crisis specifically. So I was thinking, could you start us off today by giving us a bit of an overview of what's causing the rental crisis, what it is, in terms of how most people would be experiencing it?
Absolutely. So I think, Alex earlier in the week talked about the cost of living crisis, and I took more of an in-depth look on the chaotic rental market and how that's affecting it. So a bit of background. So the cost of rentals has been going up, over the past year or so anyway. We've seen about just under a 25% increase in the rental prices in capital cities in 2022. However, the past probably month in particular has been very strong, where we've seen a record-breaking 2.5% increase just this month, in February. Yeah. And the reason for that is that the international student situation we've got going on. So the Chinese government basically said that you can't, if you're an international student, you basically can't do international university in China. You have to go overseas. So we've seen this massive influx of international students from China, like roughly 40,000 expected come in, and they're struggling to find a place. On an anecdotal level, I have mates, one mate saw a house recently and he spoke to the real estate agent, and the agent said that they had 150 people message them about the place. There's all these videos online at the moment where you've got 60 people lining up to inspect a place. I've had mates even staying on balconies, which is crazy. I think I've got a link, I can pull that up. People staying on balconies, it's unbelievable. So it's just absolute chaos at the moment, and it doesn't look like there's necessarily an end in sight.
That is crazy. And you would think that some of that wouldn't really be allowed or possible, but the reality is people will go to whatever length they need to go to find somewhere to stay. And when you've got a number like 40,000 new people just flooding the market all at once, it's going to create problems. And I saw in that chart that you put in the news today, some of I think across the board, it was under 1% vacancies pretty much across the country, wasn't it?
Record low as well.
Yep. So linking this to inflation, because we know that obviously rent prices going up drives inflation, but is also probably caused by inflation. It's that difficult situation of figuring out what's driving what, and it starts feeding upon itself. Can you give us a little bit of background about how inflation is actually contributing to the cost of living crisis, and probably the other way around, how the cost of living crisis is contributing to inflation and inflation in rental prices specifically?
We've kind of got this interesting circle at the moment where inflation goes up, so RBA raises rates, right? Mm-hmm. And then kind of in a weird way, because the interest rates because the rental component of the CPI basket is the largest, so it is 6%, and it should be a lot more, right? Because people spend a lot more than 6% of their income on their rent, obviously, right? I mean, I think standard's like 20 to 30% in Australia. So it should be a lot more, but it is a decent sized component. So when you see the rents go up like they're doing, inflation goes up, interest rates go up, and then as a consequence of interest rates going up, the people that own the properties might increase their rates even more because their mortgages go up. So it's kind of this weird vicious circle. And that is on top of, as discussed earlier, the increased demand, rising rates. So it's kind of a never-ending loop we've got at the moment going on. And like I said, there's not really an end in sight. It is quite a difficult situation to deal with, and there aren't many solutions being offered.
So I suppose the big question is how this links to interest rates, because you've mentioned that there, it's part of that vicious cycle that we've got going on. do you think that the RBA's policy is really making it worse? Because the point that Alex has been making is that we really don't have a choice. We have to follow along, right? So we're expecting further rate rises from the US. We're already quite a way behind the rest of the world in terms of our rate rises. We sort of did the smaller rises in the past and didn't really catch up. So can you maybe go a bit deeper into what you think that relationship is between the RBA's macro policy and what's really happening here with the rental crisis?
So the big problem is when RBA increases rates, the people that might buy homes, right? People aren't people that are going to be renting. So you have this situation where people that might buy homes for like investment purposes or infrastructure purposes to like build more properties, build more dwellings, get an investment property, they're a lot less likely to buy if rates go up.
Yep.
And so there's actually going to be a shortage of these dwellings available for people, which increase their rents. And and then the other kind of point here is that the people that want to rent, they can't afford to buy a property anyway. So you're going to have this demand of people that are always going to have to rent because they don't have a deposit saved up. And then you're going to have this kind of decrease in infrastructure and dwelling because of the rate rises. So it only really worsens the situation. And again, I'm not really commenting on the other factors where maybe we do have to increase rates, but in terms of just solving the rental crisis at the moment, it's doing a opposite effect of what you want.
And that's a really important point that you were making there about who actually buys these houses, because of course there are a lot of people who want to buy their first home, who want to enter the market, but the double-edged sword of the rate rises is, first, it's made it more expensive to do that, which makes it harder for them to do it, but it's also increased the lending requirements. So if you're a first home buyer or a young couple or whatever situation you're in where you're trying to get into the market and the bank won't even talk to you unless you're now probably in the order of a 30% deposit, that makes it really difficult to even access in the first place. You've got sky high property prices still, but you can't get in. So those people who would be buying those houses and leaving the rental market are trapped. They can't leave for an extended period of time. Like they're still going to be there for a while. And that's really what you're saying, isn't it? That the higher rates keep them trapped, but at the same time, the people on the other end who should be probably buying more of those properties to put them out for rent, they're also not interested in buying because it becomes too expensive and the risk reward's not there for them either.
Correct. It doesn't make sense because during COVID time, not be able to have like 5-10% deposit and keep expanding to buy more properties. But now if it's 30% plus the rate rises, why would builders, for example, continue to grow at that same rate?
Yeah. And of course, it's not 30% for everyone, but that's, I know, I think the things I was reading was saying, if that sort of 30% level where you start getting past mortgage lenders insurance and all of these extra costs that pile on top, that they also add to the inability for people to afford it, because you start adding another $15,000 or $20,000 just on the mortgage lenders insurance, and then that prices people out of the market who are really struggling just to scrape together any deposit.
Yep.
So where does this leave us? What's the future here then? From your analysis you've done today, where do you see us heading with rental prices in Australia going forward?
Well, I think there's two key points. The first key point, I think it might not get that much worse compared to where we are as of right now because of the Chinese immigration situation. But given in 2022 we still had a 25% increase, I think over the next 2 or 3 years it's actually still going to be quite bad. And given the rate rises, it's going to get worse. So I think that if you're a renter right now, understand, don't expect in the short to medium term, you're going to get any kind of benefit.
Relief from that.
Relief's a better word. And the second key point is that I think it could be a good time for property investors in terms of the yield they're going to get on their property prices, because it's likely that rates will continue to increase. We could see a situation with increased home defaults or foreclosures, or people having to sell their homes, kind of forced sells because of the increased rates. So property prices could actually go down and the demand for rent will stay the same. So the yield that one would get on their property, I think, is likely to increase over the next 2 to 3 years. So as an investment perspective, property could be a lot better if you have the necessary capital able to kind of execute that.
So that's a really interesting point, because it means that if you are in that position where you can afford to be entering the market, it's actually quite a good situation, because the yield will go up exactly as you describe. You're buying cheaper, the rent's still staying at those same high levels. So great, but I suppose that further exacerbates the divide between the rich and the poor. That income divide becomes a real problem.
Yeah, I think it could be a situation where that income divide in Australia only increases with the way the property market is trending.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Branko, thank you so much for your detailed work on this topic today. I know it's an issue that pretty much everyone's experiencing. So you either experience it directly, or family or friends who are struggling with the rental market right now. So it's a very timely analysis and discussion. So thanks for that.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks also for everyone for watching. Remember, reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. If you want to share your personal personal stories or situation, or whatever you want to share to us, we love to hear that and try and engage with that wherever we can. So reach out on the socials if you want to engage with us on that. That's us for this week on Insights. We'll be back next week to discuss what will be very relevant from what we talked about today, because the RBA decision is next week. So we'll discuss that then, no doubt. So until then, have a great weekend, everyone.